The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be back again with you today, bearing witness to mood, mind, and health. And we have some very interesting authors and speakers and mental health professionals with us today. Martina Williams and Kyle Warend, I think that's how it's pronounced.
Warend.
Was that
Warend?
Warend?
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
It's a tough one, I tell you.
Warend, now I got it now. And they have published a book called an IFS Reparenting Workbook, which is really standing for Internal Family Systems, Skills to Heal Childhood Trauma, Nurture Secure Attachments, and Embrace Radical Acceptance. Now, I think it's a really interesting topic because it's something that most people aren't that familiar with. Internal family systems is a newer protocol for helping people. We're going to get into the meaning of many of the core terms and try to wrap our minds around how this particular approach is making a difference in the lives of many people. I'm your host again today, Dr. Anna Baranowski. I'm really delighted that you're all here. I know we always have the most amazing listeners, and I know that because we get emails throughout the show. So I want to encourage you again that if you have a comment or a question or even an experience that you want to share during today's program, just email us at instudio101@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. You bring so much to the conversation, so I just want to encourage our listeners today to definitely email us. We're exploring this fascinating and very, I would say, increasingly kind of influential approach to understand ourselves, internal family systems. And I'm going to just say the names of my guests are Martina Williams and Kyle Warend. No, I think
nice. You nailed it. Yeah.
Perfect. I did? Oh, good. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. And they are the authors of the IFS Reparenting Workbook, which I'm holding up because I have a copy. And as everybody knows who's ever listened, I dog ear and I kind of highlight things throughout books that I get so that I can ask real questions about the books that I'm reviewing, because it makes it so interesting when we have the authors with us. Rather than looking at anxiety, perfectionism, people-pleasing, self-criticism, avoidance, anger, or any other difficult patterns simply as something that's wrong with you, IFS seems to invite us to become curious about these parts of ourselves that have developed actually as strategies something to help you rather than just a hindrance in your life. And I'm hoping that Martina and Kyle will help us better understand this idea, helping us to recognize how IFS can help with this idea of reparenting and what that really means. Childhood trauma, attachment, the body, self-compassion, and our relationship not only with ourselves, but with the people in our lives. So today we're going to learn more both about Kyle and Martina, because they were very, very forthcoming in this book, both telling about their own personal stories, as well as what might have happened with their clients and how those individuals used IFS to make sense of their lives and their relationship with themselves. I'm looking forward to learning more about parts, managers, firefighters, and exiles. And believe me, I really don't know a lot about IFS, so I'm going to be spending the hour learning from you. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. And I wonder if it would be okay if we start with me just understanding what got you interested in internal family systems, and either of you can answer first.
I'll let Martina take it because she's the veteran, and then I'll follow up if that works for you, Martina.
I found internal family systems not on purpose. I had been going through a really difficult period in my life, and I had a breakup with someone that I was in love with, and some part of me said, I'm done, never again. I've got to change this pattern. And so I reached out to a woman online who I saw did EMDR, which I was familiar with. And she said, I do EMDR. However, I'm really much more focused on a spiritual psychotherapy approach called IFS and internal family systems parts work. And I read a description on their website, IFS's website, and I jumped out of bed. I startled my dog, Angel, because I was so excited just reading the descriptions. I thought, I need this modality. And I signed up for the first training that was happening 2 weeks later in Asheville, where I live. And it just changed my life, both personally and professionally. And it helped me heal the attachment wounds so that when I finally chose a new partner, who I am married to now, I chose very differently because my young parts were not the ones in charge anymore. So that's the brief version of how I found it.
Ooh, that is really, really meaningful. I want to just, before we move on to Kyle, you described IFS, well, actually, it was the clinician who you were working with who described IFS as a spiritual approach. Now, can you help me to understand why that word was used?
Yes, because the resource that we use to heal ourselves is inside of each and every person. In IFS, we refer to this as the self. And the self has all of these qualities that Dr. Schwartz, who created IFS, names with these C words like compassion, clarity, creativity, courage, connectedness. And so really the IFS clinician is helping us uncover more and more of this treasure trove of what we call self-energy. And that's the aspect of ourselves that does the reparenting.
So, when I think about spiritual, I almost kind of go to more of a transpersonal and mystical kind of awareness of life and nature. So you're equating the development and understanding of yourself as a spiritual element of life. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and that all of us are born with this seed of our most unique, most authentic self. And if we're raised in a family environment where that true self gets nurtured, then we have a lot of access to this true self. If we don't have that kind of attunement and nurturing, then the self begins to get buried as we grow older, or it just doesn't have an opportunity to develop fully. So it is something that is within all of us when we're born.
So it sounds like, as you were describing it, IFS has a particular strength within attachment injuries and how we might select people in our lives, like whether they're, intimate partners or friends or whatever, the people that we gravitate towards, we may be doing that based on drivers that are not that healthy at times.
Exactly, because these are young parts of us that hold the attachment wounds or try to protect the young parts of us that have attachment wounds. And so what happens is these parts are the ones who are unconsciously choose the partner. So if I have an abandonment wound, which I did, then I'm unconsciously seeking someone to help heal that abandonment wound. But it doesn't work that way.
Well, if you're
Our,
super
right.
lucky, no,
If
you
you're
might,
super lucky.
if you're
Yeah.
super lucky, I mean, it does
Yeah,
happen,
it does
right? Like,
happen.
yeah, where
It
you
does.
find yourself kind of, oh my goodness, I just somehow got incredibly lucky. And this is where kind of to me, it's like the awesomeness of life can land where you're going like, I did have a attachment wound. And then somewhere along the line, life gifted me with this beautiful human being. And you start,
Yes.
like, connection can be very healing for sure.
Oh, it's so true. And for those of us who didn't get that lucky right out of the gate in choosing their partner, I say, of course, my husband now is my true husband. The first one was my practice marriage. Uh, what happens is these young parts think that, oh, we're gonna have redemption from the partner that we choose. And maybe it happens sometimes, but the majority of the time it doesn't.
I think one of the sweet parts of the book that you wrote is that you both um, are willing to share of yourself, which is very generous. I will say that. Kyle, what are your thoughts? What brought you to um, internal family systems?
Yeah, I went to, so I lived just outside of DC in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and I was living in DC at the time when I first came across IFS. There's a big psychotherapy network or symposium that happens in DC every year. And I went and saw Dick Schwartz speak, I guess about over a decade ago. Just intrigued by the idea of what I saw in the little blurb about his 3 or 4 hour talk, and I went and I was kind of blown away by he just refused to like do a traditional training. He said, "Here's a video that I made of this model. There's no way I can explain it. You just have to see it." And I found that really compelling. And then to witness him doing it with grad students, I believe it was at the time, it was just very, very raw and very deep work, which is what I was craving. Um, and just something like, I guess similar to Martina, something about the way it was framed just immediately clicked with me, made a lot of sense. This idea of parts of us and different aspects of ourselves showing up in different environments in response to different stressors and related to childhood hurts and things like that, that just really, really resonated. So I started kind of incorporating the really like minute aspects of it into my work with my clients, and then started sort of obsessively attending trainings until I was able to work my way into a level 1 and level 2 training. It's been history ever since.
I thought it was interesting that what you described, Richard Schwartz showing a video because he says it's almost impossible for me to explain it. And, I have to say, like a lot of the deepest therapeutic work has that element to it where, you can read something about it, but until you actually see the unpackaging of something profound, it is almost impossible to capture that in words alone. You have to either experience it as a client or practice it as a clinician and witness or learn in a very hands-on, in a very rich model, in a training model that allows for real practice. So
Exactly.
yeah, so when I was reading the book, and as I said, I haven't done any IFS training, and I was going, oh my God, I'm gonna have to talk to these people because it's hard for me to wrap my mind around some of even the examples, like where are we really going? So understanding that it's exceptionally experiential is
Hmm.
very helpful to know. Although, I think that's when you really get to the real depth of growth and change is with those experiential. We can't talk somebody out of feeling bad. There
Yeah.
just isn't any of that. That will never work. So fantastic. Okay.
Mhm.
How did the two of you start working together?
Uh,
I think we should shout out Risa because she's sort
we
of the
did. Risa Adams up in
she's
Toronto.
she's an amazing IFS therapist who she's just a magician at knitting people together. She just knows people that have similar vibes, I guess. I don't even want to say interests. It's much deeper than that. And she just was like, "Oh, you should meet Martina." Kyle, I met her at a training, IFS training, and I identify as a highly sensitive person, and I brought that up in the training, and she was like, "Oh, you should meet my friend Martina. She also identifies as highly sensitive." And we connected over Zoom, I think. I don't remember the first time. I think it must have been
So,
Zoom, and then we just hit it off immediately. I think Martina offered to let me help present at the IFS conference, and I was totally taken aback because I had never met her before. It was just very generous,
Oh,
and
wow.
that adventure led us to be very, very close friends, and now I feel like family at this point.
Oh, wow, that's so sweet. So that's what I was talking about in the beginning when I said sometimes we just have this awesome experience of finding people
Mm,
that we
yeah,
are meant to connect with. Even if we still have some injuries with inside and, always staying open to that. I think that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. Risa Adams in Toronto, huh? That's where I am.
yes,
Oh,
yes,
you
gladly.
made that connection. All right.
yes.
Okay. So like let's just start with, you know, what is IFS? What are these parts exactly? And is it normal, I say in quotations,
Yeah.
for people to have parts?
Yes, we actually neither of us have met anybody who didn't have parts so far, as so far as we know. And when you name some of the things like perfectionism or people pleasing or the inner critic, we think of these as parts. We have protective parts that protect the deeply wounded parts called exiles, and that we hear it in our own language. We hear people saying, there's a part of me that really wants to stay home and be with my family tonight, and another part of me wants to go out and have a drink with the girls. And or a part of me wants to stay at this job because it offers health benefits, and another part really wants to be you know off on my own, do my own private practice. And Kyle can go a little more deeply if he wants to, if you want him to, about the different types of parts. But basically, being a, a perfectionist or a people pleaser or a helper, problem solver, these are strategies that we learn unconsciously when we're young to try to navigate the challenges of whatever family environment we're born into. And so, for example, Kyle and I were both given the message growing up that we were too sensitive. And so we got damaged feeling as if there was something wrong with us, and that might be the core wound. And then maybe we developed a perfectionist inside of us to keep us looking as if we were highly competent. So nobody would notice that deep inside there was this feeling or thought that there's something wrong with us. How's that to start us off,
Okay,
Kyle?
so
Yeah.
let me just slow this down,
Sure.
for a person, like I said, who doesn't know anything about IFS. From what you just described, it sounds like parts, in other words, could be even referenced. I mean, I know you're using a particular language that is in alignment with IFS, but it almost sounds like your parts are a quality of your personality, an element of your strategy to, establish a way of dealing with the struggles of your life. You know, but when you were talking about being a highly sensitive person, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of highly sensitive people is it's a strength. And, um, obviously, it is a quality that could occur not because um, it's a self-defense strategy, but because it is a quality of your personality that you have the great good luck to have. Because I always find, I do a ton of supervision with students, and I often find that the ones that are most gifted clinically are these highly sensitive people, because you
Yeah.
have this capacity to really kind of bring yourself with everything to those clinical sessions with a willingness, because that you have this high awareness.
Well, yes, I mean, high sensitivity actually has brain and nervous system differences. We make up about 20 to 30% of the global population. And everything you said, I believe, is true. Let me give you an alternative perspective. When I was young, in elementary school, kids can be, as you know, very vicious. And I was bullied because of my sensitivity. I was bullied because I cried so easily, because I showed empathy in ways that other kids didn't show. And also in some families, sensitive people are told, uh, stop crying, you're too feeling, you're too dramatic, don't be so sensitive, you take things on too personally.
Yeah.
And so getting those messages, we think, oh, yeah, something's wrong with me, or look, I'm the only one in the class who cries that easily over something being shown on a video in our classroom. Or if one of my classmates started crying about something, I started crying as well, just involuntarily. So children often have this instinct to want to cut the sheep out of the herd that is different. And that high sensitivity, if it's not understood, is considered a threatening difference.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to start reading some questions because they are piling up. So we might as well get into that. And I will pivot back to the book and the content in the book, because there's lots of great exercises. I just want to let people know, but I also want to pay attention to our amazing listeners here. This is from Tina. Thank you, Tina, for emailing us. Tina asks, is this concept just for kids or for adults as well?
I'll
Yeah, I
give you
would
that,
say
Kyle.
I think there's research out there, or people are working on using it with kids. I'm not as familiar of how that's going or what that looks like. It feels like it would be very accessible with children. I've done a little bit of work with that back when I was working in middle school and high school. Um, but it was developed initially for adults, and I think people are adapting it, like they are with a lot of different populations. They're adapting it for kids.
And have you found it to be very effective with children as well?
Yeah, I think I mean, to me, it almost feels like a natural, at least with some of the kids I used it with, it almost felt natural that they would be, because they're already kind of willing to engage in this imaginative realm that sometimes IFS engages in. So I think it's a little easier to be like, yeah, when you were over here screaming at the teacher and throwing the chair, and then the next day you felt bad about it, those are different aspects of yourself. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's like exactly what it felt like, and they're a little more like nobody's really given them that option of seeing themselves that way. They're just like the bad kid. So giving them that possibility is very freeing, really
Oh, that sounds
non-judgmental.
very meaningful for a child who would be maybe not connected completely to self-awareness.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they get a chance to step back and really kind of take stock of what just happened and how it might have happened rather than being just out of control. That's lovely. Sounds like a lovely approach for children.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an aspect of the model that Martina and I've always loved, which is it's very non-pathologizing. There's not a sense that like you're focusing on distorted thinking and that there's something wrong that needs to be fixed or rooted out. It's about engaging on the level of wherever that part's coming from, and then acknowledging that it evolved from something natural that happened, and it was the best case or the best they could do to respond in that moment, and it just kind of carried forward throughout their life.
Nice, nice. Okay, this one's from Michael. Hi, Michael. Thanks for emailing us today. Michael's asking what is MDR, but Michael, I believe what you're referring to is EMDR, and Martina had referenced that she communicated with a clinician. She wanted some treatment for herself, initially attracted by the treatment approach of EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's an approach that is used very, very commonly with processing through traumatic events historically. So the work with IFS is not EMDR, but I'm pretty sure that's what you're referencing. Does that make sense to you, Martina? Yeah, because you had mentioned it, right? But you
Yeah,
said it so quickly, EMDR,
I
so
did say
could
it
have
quickly.
sounded like MDR, right?
Yeah, and I am a EMDR clinician myself. I used it for 10 years before I found IFS, and I found that it was so good for single episode traumas, but for complex trauma, complex PTSD, childhood PTSD, chronic exposure to trauma, that the IFS model was more effective based on really getting to the roots of things.
Yeah, I can understand that because there tend to be a lot of layers when we have a complex PTSD. We use different approaches with. So I have run a clinic called Bear Psychology, and at Bear we use pretty complicated kind of approaches to deal with these deeper, layered wounds for that very reason, because I find that although I love using EMDR and have for many, many years, I do tend to bring in other interventions to help with and I use different language. So we use something called thematic map and release, where you're actually allowing yourself to go with the themes rather than the specific trauma, because we understand that with themes, you're actually capturing, in some ways, like parts or your firefighters or whatever it is. Like you've realized that, life will always bring you like the worst event or whatever belief system that you have, you carry it to different places in your life. Sounds like there's a little bit of an overlap with IFS around that. This one is from Riley. Thank you, Riley. This is a very interesting question, I think, Martina and Kyle, and I think it would be helpful for you to explain this. In layman's terms, what is HSP? Yeah, because
Always
Yeah,
happy to
you're
talk
both
about that.
referencing it, so
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
might as well get into that a little bit.
yeah. I mean, HSP really refers to being a highly sensitive person, which is Elaine Aron, a clinical researcher, coined that term in 1996, and that we have particular traits as highly sensitive people. She goes by the DOES, that we have incredible depth of
So what's
processing.
DOES?
DOES is depth of processing, overstimulation, high empathy, and sensitivity to subtleties. And so in layman's terms, I'm going to say that sensitive people are environmentally sensitive. We are sensitive to the environments we're in. If we are at a toxic work environment, that's going to crush us more than the average bear, no pun intended. Whereas, whereas if we have a positive work environment, we're going to thrive. We're going to thrive more than the average person. And so on the spectrum of sensitivity, everybody has some level of sensitivity going from low all the way to high. And so, so maybe 20% have the highest levels of sensitivity, up to 30%. And that means that our brain centers that are responsible for emotion are wired a little differently. We have mirror neurons, which allows us to be empathetic. For a sensitive person, mirror neurons fire more frequently. And we also have differences in the hippocampus, and we are more prone to anxiety based on the hippocampus. And I don't want to take all the time away. I want to hear Kyle as well. But it's, if you think about being very sensitive to your environments, if I get on a plane and a woman in front of me has on really strong perfume, that's going to give me a headache for the duration of the flight. So Kyle, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about HSP stuff forever. I find it really fascinating. A lot of HSPs have chronic illness because of the higher intensity of experience. There's a lot more stress, I think, experienced by people who are, especially in the current environment with so much stimuli. But I think in terms of like the topic of this, I think the crossover of HSP and IFS is really fascinating. And it was honestly kind of the original idea we had for the workbook before it turned into just a specifically IFS workbook. But the reason for that being that it's estimated that like 50 to 60% of the people that are in therapy are already on some aspect of the HSP spectrum, because they're going through it so much with how sensitive they are. And I think my experience of using IFS with people who identify as highly sensitive is that they receive it really, really well, and they internalize it really quickly, and they go really far with it. And that's been my experience as well. I have an IFS therapist, and I feel of all the different modalities I've used for my own healing, that this feels like the one that has taken me the farthest, and I've been able to really get into the weeds of everything that's been going on for me in my life. And I just really see that replicated in how I'm able to engage with my clients as an HSP, and when they're in HSP, it's sort of like we get each other in a different way. To your point about the people who are students who are HSP that you work with, that they can engage a little deeper with some of the clients that they have. I think that I just really see that. So I'm hoping that clarifies. I know that there's a lot more we
Well,
could say about HSPs, but
I love the explanation of HSP because I think it's something that I think it's fairly common. I think people are walking around with a lot of tenderness, and
yep,
it lands in a place where they start hating themselves for something that's actually in a lot of ways a gift, the
absolutely.
capacity to be, fully immersed in the experience of this life. And like, how do you navigate that and still feel intact is, becomes a big question for, ongoing, integration and well-being as a human being. That's,
Yeah,
tall order in a way.
it
Well, and I
is.
see that a lot.
Mhm.
I
Go
see that a
ahead.
lot with my work with men. I just think that it's such an under identified population of highly sensitive men. As a highly sensitive man, all the messaging I got about that from a young age had to kind of counteract that, and it still actively interferes with my ability to show up for myself and my family. And working with men who I see are clearly highly sensitive, they're very averse to that topic or that title. And the way that it presents in their parts is very different than it would for, I think, female identifying people, often, not always, but a lot of times. So I find that to be a really fascinating subset of kind of what we're talking about, that the way that the intersectionality of HSP and IFS can impact the development of parts in a different way.
Mhm. Mhm. Maybe we could talk a little bit more for a while about what I'm going back to the book now, and we still have a lot of questions, but I don't always get to them all. Maybe we can go back to some of these elements that you are referencing, like parts and managers and firefighters and exiles, because I want people who are listening with us today to have a sense of the scope of that and how it kind of winds together.
Yeah, I like the idea of the kind of model, I guess, just like I think Martina and I talked about like the elevator pitch of how to put this in the workbook was, there's parts, there's self, and that's kind of like the distinction, and there's different aspects of parts. And I think the ones that tend to lead the show, or what we kind of refer to in the model as managers, they're the kind of like people that get you up in the morning and they're productive and they're externally focused. And a lot of that's sort of rooted in childhood efforts to kind of not get hurt again, essentially. You don't want to, the ways that you responded in childhood to maybe critical feedback or or neglect. A lot of times that's sort of like the silent, silent hurt that people don't realize they have. So kind of just paying attention to the ways that parts of you or thought patterns you might have or ways you approach the world are very externally focused. We kind of refer to as managers. They're very trying to keep everything copacetic, not wanting to rock the boat, wanting to fit in. And then there's this other aspect of our psyche called the firefighters. And the reason they're called this is because they tend to be, not always, but they tend to be very intense. They can be aspects of ourselves where it's like binge drinking or numbing out to binge watching TV, any kind of addictive behaviors. But also it can be sort of this kind of spacing out, dissociation. These are aspects of ourselves that people don't really track as a potential, almost like a separate entity, but it's really useful to kind of pay attention that in this certain moment, all of a sudden I'm sort of getting really tired, or I'm sort of spacing out, or all of a sudden I really want to like go eat some junk food out of nowhere, and these are things that they sort of take over, and it's not something that's really, it doesn't really care about how our behaviors impact other people. It's very much about, I need a break right now, especially as a father. Oh my God, as a father of two small children, I have a lot of firefighter energy at night when they finally go to bed. And so thinking about it is that sort of like this effort of our nervous system trying to balance out, okay, all day long, I've been keeping it together as a therapist and as a father and as a partner, and I cleaned all the dishes and I did the laundry, and now the kids are asleep. Now I'm just going to stay up all night. And for me, it's soccer. I love soccer. I watch soccer highlights and eat popcorn and whatever. And then I should be going to sleep. And so to me, that's kind of like my system's effort to balance out all the efforting I've externally done. It's trying to balance me out with like, okay, now I'm going to do what I want to do, even at the expense of, not sleeping. So I think a lot of people can identify, maybe not that specifics of that, but that sort of push pull. So that's kind of what we talk about with like managers are very external. Firefighters are very much about trying to help us get what we need. Everybody else be damned. And then what's really going on underneath that is typically what we call the exiles. And that's typically some aspect of some kind of childhood hurt or trauma, something really difficult that happened when we were very young and vulnerable. And somehow our nervous system or our internal system coded it as just no man's land. We're not going back there. We don't ever want to feel that way again. That's something that is too unbearable at that time. And it kind of traps it in that moment forever. And the intensity of that experience stays that way until we're able to use the model to kind of circumnavigate back to it and approach it from that kind of place of self energy that we're talking about, this sort of healing. Okay, I want to hear about that. I'm older now. I can handle it. Please let me know. This kind of warm, this is where the reparenting stuff comes in, we can get into later. But that idea that internally, now that we're older, we can actually safely go back and expose ourselves to those memories and experiences in a way that's not going to overstimulate or overwhelm us and cause us to need these extreme reactions that our parts are engaged in. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, so as you're talking, all of these things, when I work with my patients, often, at the early stages, I will hear, I just want this, and you use the word part, but it could be like, I just want to stop doing that stupid thing, or what's wrong with me, and I hate that about myself.
Yep.
And so, when I'm thinking about you describing all these different parts and the qualities of those parts, and what I hear often is like, just, can we not just stop this? Can I not get off the bus? Help me get off
Hmm.
the bus. So
Hmm.
I think from what you've described as IFS, helps people to understand what this part is about and what it's trying to do for the individual. So can you help me about that question? Like, how do people move from how do I get rid of this to what can I learn from this? How can I make sense of this and use it in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think with a lot of love and compassion and encouragement from the clinician, and the clinician is really there with this distance from the patient's internal system. We have our own system that can be hard to work with, but we start by bringing curiosity to this part. So I hear there's a part of you that wants to get rid of another part, which keeps behaving this way. Can we get really curious? Can we get to know this part? Can we learn to befriend this part? And there's a lot of nuance and untangling that happens. It's not a instantaneous going from I hate this part to now I truly have compassion for it. I really get where it's coming from. There is a process, there are steps that help us become more and more compassionate toward this young part that is trying to help us, even if the help feels very misguided in this 38-year-old body, for example. Yeah, so there's a process in which we befriend our managers and we befriend our firefighters as we truly get to know them and understand them. We find we don't have any bad parts. And as we build relationships with these different parts, then they relax. They realize, oh, there is an adult in charge, a kind, loving self. And we will now allow you to access this exile part that believes there's something wrong with it. Does that make sense?
Oh, it really, really does, because I kind of have conceptualized a lot of that inner self-talk that is very harmful to oneself with a kind of phrasing that I have been using clinically, which is something like, okay, so that thing just came up for you, and that's a really harsh inner voice. What happens when we reflect on that with curiosity and kindness, appreciation and understanding, so that it is pivoting our and allowing us to look at something that we would automatically look at with hostility, with new eyes, with fresh eyes.
Yeah,
You got
exactly.
it. Exactly. You got it.
And I think that's what's so fascinating is like to Martina's point is that you almost have to help them realize that for them to come in and say what you were saying, and like I think you have to help them realize that there's another part saying that they don't like this aspect of you. And that could be a real like, what? People are kind of like, what does that mean? It's like, well, in order for you to dislike the way you're behaving, that means that there's some part of you that wants you to be different. So if we could maybe just stop trying to be different, then we could actually be curious, why is this happening? But right now
Oh,
it's just seeing it through the lens of this is just a bad thing. And if you can say like, okay, we get that that part of you thinks it's bad, but are we able to get some more space around it and say, okay, that's just one perspective. It's very limited. Is there some other way that we could get up close to it and see, oh, it actually just wants me to get a break because I've been working so much. It's just doing it like a really terrible way, but this other one's so oppressive in its judgment of it that it's reacting really poorly because it wants to get back at that one. And that's where I think the idea of it being like an internal family is so accurate because there's just like infighting happening all the time because one part's being belittled by the other and they're like, F you, I don't want to listen to you, so I'm going to react really big, or, you're suffocating, so I can't get any attention, so I have to do something really, out of proportion to what you want to get your attention. So when we can really be honest with ourselves about that, it really brings a lot more oxygen into the room and it slows, I mean, that's a big part of it is just slowing things down. I always talk with my clients, but we have to get really granular. You think about like a high def TV talking about like that level of granular with these parts, because there's so much nuance in there in these people's systems and our own systems too.
And the framing, internal family systems, like this whole like 100 characters that you have like running around inside of you, going like creating all this chaos and havoc, and you're having all these internal arguments, and it's like, well, sometimes that's how it is on the outside too, but what can you do about that?
Yeah.
First you deal with the inside, and then you can deal with
Exactly.
the outside. But
Exactly.
I love that explanation. Like it makes a lot of sense, and it gives a framework for people to start to make sense of the fact that, yeah, there's like a lot of arguments going on inside of you, and there's a reason for it. So
Hmm.
let's take a moment and actually think about how and why these parts are actually developed. If we could spend a little time thinking about that.
Beautiful, yes. I don't know in Canada if you have that. There was a nursery rhyme about Old Mother Hubbard who lived in a cupboard, or was it the one about the woman with the shoe with all the children in the shoe? You
Oh
know
yeah,
what
we have all the same
you
ones.
have all the same
Yeah, we
ones.
do.
Yes, and I think yeah, and I want to comment on that because in the 70s, John Bradshaw wrote The Homecoming, Embracing Your Inner Child. And that's still a concept that's alive today. In IFS, we would say we have inner children, not just one inner child at a particular age. We have all these different children within us at different ages, and we can meet and help all of them.
Mhm.
And I would say as a father, especially having young children, I'm finding that it's just a massive influence on how I'm able to work with my clients, and especially my own. I'm shocked at the parts of me that show up in reaction to them. Like I'll behave like a little 5-year-old in reaction to a 5-year-old because it's my frame of reference. I didn't really grow up with a lot of kids outside of when I was a kid. So a 5-year-old part of me will react to my 6-year-old and I'll be pouting and I'm like, what is happening right now? And I think those are those interesting things that people can use as like little touch points. They're like, oh, is this start opening up your mind to this idea that there might be parts of us, right? Like that if you're acting in a way that you're confused about or in an extreme way that you're like, why was that? Why did I just do that? I think everybody can remember those moments in their life where they had a really extreme reaction and they were confused by it. That's an opportunity to kind of, oh, what was that about? Oh, that reminds me of this time in 5th grade where I got humiliated in class or bullied or whatever, and it's just flared up and I reacted in the same way I did back then.
Okay,
um yeah.
here's a good one. I have to pivot to this because I think this is really, from a psychological perspective, very interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, this is an email from Gail, and Gail says, "I'm going to give this context, so just give me a moment, okay?" Gail says, and thank you for the email, Gail. Hello, I am in capitals a highly sensitive person. Dot 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 dot. Bold. Um, and all caps, help with an exclamation point, but the emails, all your emails, they have a like a portion where you can give it a context right at the top. It says help, and in brackets, ha, exclamation. So you understand, I'm laying it all out because from a psychological perspective, the way this is sent in, the perspective, all of these little highlights and the ha and all that. I am a highly sensitive person. Help. Ha. What are your thoughts?
It
Well,
feels like
yeah.
parts written we're writing that email on someone.
I figured that's where you were gonna go. So
Yeah.
great. Fantastic. Okay, let's
Oh,
let's do the analysis, please, Kyle and Martina.
Yeah, I mean, I think just I I can identify. I think I agree with what you were saying, Dr. Ann, about the HSPs being a strength, right? I think that is underlying all of it. I do deeply believe that, but I also it's very difficult to be an HSP. And again, Martina's heard all of my woes of being an HSP father. It's one of the not one it's the most difficult thing I've ever been through and currently going through in my life, and it continues to just be it's like trying to get a straw and sip off of a fire hose all day long and then have to go to bed and not sleep because they keep you up all night and then do it again. And so I think like when I hear something like this kind of email coming in, I really identify with it. Um, and I think it really comes down to, I think some of what we talk about in the workbook and what we've been talking about today is um, a really, really helpful thing with HSPs is somatic work. And we brought some of that into the workbook. And I think what I love, another aspect that I love about this model is that it, I mean, I think Dick Schwartz even acknowledged he kind of stole some somatic stuff, or maybe not stole, but kind of incorporated it after he realized how useful it was from his original approach to the model. And something about the physicality for HSPs of their emotional experience is really important to take into account. How overwhelming it can be physically to have emotions as an HSP, and um, how these emotions can present. I think having a parts lens can be really helpful as a way to conceptualize emotions presenting this intensely. It can give you a space to kind of step back and see them. That's a big part of what some of the work involves, is sort of externalizing the parts and sort of say, okay, I get it. You're really activated right now. Can you step out and give me some space so we can talk? You know, sometimes I'll ask people, how close is that part to you? And they're like, yeah, it's like right in my face. I'm like, well, think about it. If that was a person you're trying to talk to, would that be a way that you'd want to engage with them? Like, no. Like, okay, well, ask the part to step back, that you want to hear them, but you need them to slow down, step back. So I think there's the slowness, the spaciousness, the somatic experience. I think those are all things I think are really important aspects for HSPs with using this model. Martina, I know you have some insights here too.
Well, in just listening to how that email is worded, I think, oh, I can so identify with this. Like, this person, is saying, I'm a highly sensitive person. And one part is saying help, and another part is kind of, haha. I think many of us highly sensitive people kind of have learned to joke about our sensitivity, a little bit as a protective mechanism. My husband and I walk into the house. I'm like, what's that smell? And he's like, I don't smell anything. I'm like, there's a dead rat, and I know there's a dead animal in here. I can smell it. And we're often told that there's something wrong with us because we have big emotions, but we're wired for big emotions. Now, having said that, if we're not taught how to regulate our nervous system, right, by parents that are attuned, then it's very hard for us to regulate our emotions. And so along with the parts work, I also blend in nervous system work, because if we can regulate the nervous system, then our emotions can regulate for us. They still may be big, but they're regulated for us as sensitive people. And that's really going to allow us to thrive, right? So if we have a part that says there's something wrong with you, stupid, other part, for being so emotional or dramatic or drama queen, or what's the other word, histrionic, those messages are so negative, and highly sensitive people learn to internalize those messages. And Dr. Anna, I don't know if it would be appropriate to give a resource of a website,
Oh,
not
I
my
would
own.
love you to, because that was actually one of the questions I was going to say.
Yeah.
Is that if there was one practice from the workbook that you would like to encourage listeners to kind of get a taste of, that would be such a gift. So please, please do that. And the other thing is that after our conversation today, we'll be emailing you, and then you can make sure that gets to my team so they put it on the links
Oh,
as well. So
terrific.
Great.
what is it?
The website is called Highly Sensitive Refuge.com, and you can read hundreds of articles on being highly sensitive and how does it impact you at work and in relationships and within your family. So I think it's a beautiful resource that I recommend my highly sensitive people go to. And Kyle, is there an exercise in our book that stands out to you strongly
I
that
mean,
might?
it's not unique to our workbook, but I think we engage with it in a really creative way in our workbook. Is just this concept of the 6 Fs, which is it's an IFS concept, but I
Oh,
think
yes, please help us with that.
yeah, I think the way that we tried to write the workbook from a very approachable perspective, and I think this idea of 6 Fs is essentially like it's sort of like a stepladder into working with parts, and it's 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 kind of brilliant because it's very simple, but it works really well if you follow it, and it doesn't have to go exactly in order. Sort of like the stages of grief, there could be some forward movement, some backward movement, but essentially it's find, focus, flesh out, befriend. What is the part? Oh wait, I'm missing something here. There's one of the yeah. Help me out, Martina.
Let's see, find the part in or around your body, focus on that part, flesh
Yeah,
it out as much as possible. Uh, and then, oh my gosh, now I'm having a blank.
you're
We're
welcome.
befriend, oh, we find out. So let's say it's a manager part that is a highly critical. We want to find out, well, what are your concerns? Highly critical part, manager, protector. What are your concerns if you didn't do your job? What would happen in your mind if you weren't highly critical to Martina? And then as we find out, we hear, oh, it's like, well, Martina might make mistakes. And if she makes mistakes, she might fail at her work, or her friends might not like her. So we're kind of trying to learn about the fears of a protector, and then we befriend it. It's like, oh gosh, that sounds like a really serious concern. You really care about Martina. You don't want her to fail, right? But let's maybe consider uh, uh, how you got that job. Can you tell me, how did you get that job? How old were you? And then it's this process of, oh, okay, maybe this part came along when Martina was 8. She's 60 something now. So maybe we're going to help this little 8-year-old part understand that Martina is a mature woman now, and it's safe for her to make mistakes and not operate from high being highly criticized. Does
This
that
was
make
a
sense?
section of the book that I thought was really interesting too. I'm glad you mentioned it, Kyle and Martina, that you helped us to understand, flesh it out a little bit. But I will just say, I did find it interesting, and you provided a number of different examples, plus a template for people to use. Is there a link that you will provide to us so my team can make sure that our listeners can can take a look at it? And of course, if people are interested, it's the IFS reparenting workbook, and those 6 Fs, they're on page 96. Find, focus, flesh out, feel towards, befriend, and fear, and how it works, and these great examples in the book about how that works, and kind of sections that give you a chance to really flesh it out for yourself, which I thought is kind of an interesting thing. And the other thing that I really enjoyed was your parts map, where people get to kind of reflect on how those parts actually play out in any given complex life event. But I mean, it sounds to me like it's an opportunity for people to do a deeper dive and really find a way to make sense of the things that have been complicated on a very personal level. So we've got literally 1 minute left. I've really enjoyed speaking to both of you, and,
Thank you. We've
and
enjoyed it.
I thank you very much for joining us and answering questions, my questions and the questions of the people who are joining us today. And thank you everybody for sending in your questions. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to get to all of them. That does happen sometimes. But I guess the final thing I'd like to know from both of you, Kyle and Martina, you know, what would you like people to kind of walk away with, like if they were going to say, I'm really interested in this IFS thing, what would you want them to think about as a starting point, or as a place of reference for what they can get from your workbook?
Well, I want to come back to this idea of curiosity. Start to consider if certain thoughts and emotions or beliefs might be coming from a part, and then get really curious about how that behavior could be trying to help them.
That's beautiful. And Kyle?
Yeah, I would sort of piggyback off of that to say that we sort of touched on it lately earlier, but this idea of radical acceptance of all these aspects of ourselves, right? That there is no bad part of us, that they're all doing something in their own way to try to help us. And if there's a way to kind of step back from that judgmental perspective of these aspects of ourselves, that could be immensely healing.
Thank you. So I want to thank everybody and all our listeners today. Martina Williams and Kyle Rand, an IFS reparenting workbook. The links are going to be on the blog, and it's all going to be available after if you want to share it. Thank you for joining us. It has been a delight, and congratulations on your workbook.
Thank
Dr. Ann, appreciate it.
Wishing
Thank
you
you.
all a gentle day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.